Falcon Heavy is in startup.
The call that Falcon Heavy is in startup as the countdown passes the T-minus 60-second mark. Everything looking good for liftoff this evening. For the voice of the mission director, give their final go for liftoff. T-minus 20 seconds. T-minus 15. Engine ignition will begin at about T-minus 6 seconds. T-minus 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of SpaceX's Falcon Heavy rocket on a mission for the United States Space Force. Falcon Heavy now 25 seconds into the flight, performing its roll maneuver, heading out due east from Kennedy Space Center. This spectacular view of those 27 engines comes from Pete Karstens of Max Q Productions. T plus 40 seconds. Falcon Heavy continues its twilight climb into space, approaching the speed of sound now, heading east from Kennedy Space Center. 5.1 million pounds of thrust from its 27 Merlin engines. Power and telemetry reported nominal from SpaceX Launch Control. Everything looking good. Falcon Heavy now supersonic. And the Falcon Heavy is now past max Q. That's the period of maximum aerodynamic stress on the rocket. You can see the contrail forming in the wake of the Falcon Heavy's 27 main engines, arcing now east, heading for a geosynchronous orbit with the USSF-67 mission. The two side boosters are at full throttle. The center core is operating at partial thrust, conserving propellant because that center core will have to throttle up and burn a little longer than the two side boosters on this flight. That throttle up will occur after the burnout and separation of the two side boosters. Shutdown of those two side boosters coming up in about 20 seconds. There's booster engine cutoff. And booster separation. The two Falcon Heavy side boosters have jettisoned from the core stage. They're now beginning their flip maneuvers to head back to Cape Canaveral for recovery. The core stage now throttling up, continuing downrange. And there's the ignition. The ignition of the two side boosters, 3 engines on each booster firing to propel them back toward Cape Canaveral for landing. Here's a wider view now showing the boosters performing their boost back burns. Core stage continuing downrange. Spectacular views of these two boosters performing their maneuvers to head back to the launch site. 3 minutes, 20 seconds into the flight. Boost back burns are continuing on both boosters. See, the boost back burns are complete, showing one of those boosters firing cold gas thrusters. Those cold gas thrusters are used for attitude control while these boosters are traveling in space. We've heard confirmation now of stage separation, so the core stage of the Falcon Heavy rocket has completed its work. So we heard confirmation of shutdown of the core stage. That core stage has now jettisoned. We're now streaming some views from SpaceX. These views come from onboard cameras on each of the 2 side boosters. So right now the upper stage of the Falcon Heavy should be firing. However, those mission events will be occurring in secret. We won't get any real-time updates on the progress of the second stage as it heads into orbit with these 2 USSF 67 payloads for the Space Force. The SpaceX video where you're watching now comes with a bit of a time delay, about 10 to 15 seconds or so. You can see the onboard camera views on each booster is a bit obstructed. Looks like some exhaust residue may have covered up some of those camera lenses. So we're going to switch back to the view from Pete Carson's tracking one of these boosters as it heads back to Earth for landing. Here's a wide shot of the colorful exhaust plume from the Falcon Heavy as it made its way into space this evening. Everything looking good so far. And then there's ignition, entry burn, ignition. So 3 of the engines on this booster now firing. You can actually see that booster performing its entry burn in the upper part of this wide-angle view. Both boosters
Side core
appear to have
startup.
completed their entry burns. Everything looking good.
Side
PY
core
FTS has saved and NY FTS has saved.
7 minutes, 10 seconds since liftoff. Less than a minute now remaining until the landing of the 2 Falcon Heavy side boosters. Again, this view comes from Pete Carson's of Max Q Productions. And there's ignition of the landing burn on one of the 2 side boosters.
Booster landing burn.
Booster is now passed below the horizon or below the tree line from our position at Kennedy Space Center. So we're going to switch over to SpaceX.
Stage 2 is in thermal guidance. Stage 2 FTS is saved.
Booster landing leg deploy.
And there's landing. Booster landing at landing zones 1 and 2.
Both Falcons have landed.
That confirms both Falcon boosters have landed at landing zones 1 and 2. So these boosters have made their second flights to space this evening. Following an inaugural flight back in November, these boosters will be reused coming up later this spring on the next Space Force mission on the Falcon Heavy rocket, USSF